Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. This video is the next in a series looking at the financial implications of Russia's invasion of Ukraine on the global economy. And in today's episode, I want to talk about the supply of gas. President Putin has suggested that Turkey should establish itself as a hub for European gas supplies, with the idea being that Russia will supply Turkey with all of the wholesale gas, and that Turkey will then sell all of that gas onto the countries of Europe as if it's Turkish gas. Now, this isn't the first time that we've discussed the potential for Turkey to act as a conduit and sit essentially as a middleman between Russia and Europe, either for imports or exports. But this proposal is now being discussed in an open forum, and both Russia and Turkey have said that they are keen to promote this as a concept. So in today's video, we'll look at the practicalities of whether or not Turkey could establish itself as a gas hub. I'll look at the pipelines that feed into Turkey and the pipelines that come out. We'll have a look at the European network of gas pipelines and see whether or not it would be practical for those pipelines to connect into the pipelines from Turkey. We'll have a look at which other countries supply Turkey directly via pipeline and how much gas reserves they have, and whether or not it would be possible for those countries to supply gas to Europe via Turkey. I'll then talk about why President Putin and Russia is proposing this idea, and I can tell you as a spoiler alert, it isn't because he wants to help out all of the people of Europe. I'll then talk about whether or not this could solve some of the problems that Turkey is facing right now. And then finally today, I'll wrap up with my summary. So what I think the likely outcome is here, whether or not I think it's feasible that Russia will try to supply Europe via Turkey, or whether or not this is just a pipe dream, excuse the pun. So before we get on to all of that, if I could ask you to give me a thumbs up at some point during this video, if you're enjoying the content, please subscribe if you haven't done so already. Don't forget, I always include chapters in these videos, so if you don't have time to watch the whole thing, you can pick and choose what you'd like to see. And if you'd like to support the channel, please have a look below where you'll find links to YouTube super thanks and membership, as well as Buy Me a Coffee, Patreon and Amazon shopping links. And once again, I'd just like to say thank you so much to everybody that has supported the channel. So President Putin has proposed to Turkey that they should establish themselves as a hub to supply gas directly into Europe. And the strong inference here is that Russia will supply all of that gas on a wholesale basis. Turkey can then sell it on and be able to add some profit and make some money from this arrangement. So before we go on to talk about the political ramifications and whether or not Europe would be interested in buying that gas, let's have a look at the practicalities of whether or not this would be possible. Not surprisingly, given the relatively close proximity of Russia and Turkey, and also the fact that the two nations have strong trading relationships, Russia is the biggest single supplier of natural gas to Turkey, and in 2021 provided more than 50% of all of Turkish gas. Russia supplies gas directly into Turkey via two major pipelines, the Blue Stream and the Turk Stream. Now, as a lot of you are not based in Europe, I thought it was worth showing this map just to set the context of where Turkey is in relation to the rest of Europe. So you can see here that Turkey is located in the far southeast of the region, so in the bottom right-hand corner of this map. And we'll come back and talk about the pipelines that currently exist in Europe and the potential for Turkey to be able to tap into that network later in the video. But the reason I wanted to show this map is just so that everybody's got a good idea as to where Turkey is located in respect of all of the countries who need gas, such as Italy and Germany. But let's just talk about the two existing supply pipelines from Russia to Turkey, and this map shows in detail the location of both of those. The Blue Stream pipeline, which interestingly on this map is shown in yellow under the area of the Black Sea, was a joint venture project between Turkey and Russia that commenced in 1997. The pipeline itself is 754 miles long from start to finish, with a section of 232 miles over land in Russia, which you can see at the top of the graphic. The pipeline then runs for 246 miles under the Black Sea, and there is a further 276 miles onshore within Turkey. Construction of the pipeline was started in 2001 and the first gas flows commenced in February 2003. The Blue Stream pipeline has a maximum capacity of 16 billion cubic meters of gas per year. And just to put that into context, the Nord Stream pipeline, which supplied gas from Russia to Germany, had a total capacity of 59 billion cubic meters. So the Nord Stream capacity was almost 4 times greater than this pipeline. The original contract that was put in place between Gazprom and Turkey was for a 25-year period. However, the project was so successful that the two countries started to negotiate about opening up a second pipeline called Blue Stream 2, which was to run in parallel alongside the first pipeline. So this is exactly the same concept as to what Russia did with Germany on Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. However, Blue Stream 2 was later abandoned, and Russia proposed to build a second pipeline called TurkStream, which was designed to supply the far west of Turkey and also gave the opportunity for Russia to be able to sell gas directly into Europe. Detailed negotiations between Turkey and Russia commenced in 2015. However, these were later suspended due to military tension when a Russian jet was shot down over Turkish airspace. Negotiations recommenced in 2017, and the two TurkStream pipelines were opened in January 2020. So as you can see from this graphic, Russia actually constructed two parallel pipelines simultaneously, one designed to supply Turkey and the other designed to supply Eastern Europe. The total cost for the construction of the two pipelines was €11 billion, and they have a combined capacity of 31.5 billion cubic meters per year. So essentially these pipelines have the same capacity as the Blue Stream pipeline. However, because there's two of them, there's obviously double the amount of gas. And that represents around 50% of the total capacity of Nord Stream 2. And as you can see from this graphic, the subsea section of the pipeline is significantly longer and runs for 578 miles under the Black Sea. And there is an additional 43 miles of onshore pipeline that runs on the Turkish mainland. The European section of the TurkStream pipeline supplies Bulgaria, Serbia, Hungary, Slovakia and Austria. Now, in terms of the feasibility of Turkey being able to sell gas directly onto Europe, I thought it was worth looking at the existing infrastructure. Now, this is the map that we looked at earlier to give you some perspective as to where Turkey's located. And this really just shows the main pipelines that are coming directly out of Russia. However, this map gives you a much better understanding of the current network of pipelines that exist within Europe. So President Putin's idea of setting up Turkey as a hub is based upon Turkey then transmitting the gas onto other countries who can then connect their pipelines onto other pipelines, and through this interconnected network you would then potentially be able to transmit gas directly from Russia to Turkey all the way through to countries such as Portugal, Spain and France. Now, in order to assess the feasibility of whether or not Turkey could establish itself as a transport hub for gas for the rest of Europe, let's look at the existing gas pipelines that currently feed Turkey. This map shows Turkey's major gas pipelines. So as you can see at the top, we've already discussed TurkStream and Blue Stream, which are providing gas directly from Russia. But in addition to those pipelines, Turkey also receives gas directly from Iran and Azerbaijan. So Turkey certainly has access to a lot of gas from a lot of different countries, but the problem that it has is that there are capacity constraints on those pipelines, and Turkey has a massive demand for gas itself. If you follow the channel, you'll be aware that Turkey uses gas to produce electricity and also is used in industrial purposes. And over the last few years, the demand for gas to be used in the country has increased exponentially. The Iranian gas pipeline provides Turkey with 10 billion cubic meters of gas per year. The original pipeline from Azerbaijan carries 6.6 billion cubic meters each year, whilst the new Azerbaijan pipeline called TANAP has a current capacity of 16 billion cubic meters. In addition to these volumes and the gas that Russia supplies via the TurkStream and the Blue Stream pipelines, Turkey also imports 14 billion cubic meters via the Russian Trans-Balkan gas pipeline. So whilst in theory Turkey could establish itself as a hub because the infrastructure is in place, the problem that they face right now is that there's no additional capacity to be able to sell the gas on because it's using all of the gas that it's importing and more each year. Now, as I mentioned at the start of the video, this idea of Turkey becoming a gas hub for Europe was actually proposed by President Putin. And as I said, it wasn't because he's feeling sorry for Europe and he wants them to be able to have some gas through a secondary method. The reason that he's proposed this is because Russia have lost an enormous amount of revenue from the gas sales that they were making directly into Europe, and they are desperate to be able to recover that. This graphic shows Russia's exports of natural gas in 2021. And as you can see from the blue sections of this graph, the vast majority of all of its sales were made directly into Europe. Now, this graphic is actually showing the volume of gas that was provided. But in terms of revenue, Russia earned around $43 billion from gas sales in 2021. So the 19.9% of sales that went to Germany equated to around $8.25 billion. The next largest customer, which was actually classified as being part of Europe, was Turkey. So obviously Russia is not losing those sales. Turkey have taken an entirely neutral stance all through the Ukraine war. So they will remain a buyer of Russian gas. However, Russia is facing the loss of all of the rest of the blue sections, as Italy, who represented around 10%, France, Poland, and the rest of Europe are all looking to switch off those purchases. So the loss of all of these countries will equate to around $27 billion of lost revenue for Russia. So this really puts into perspective why President Putin is so keen to develop the relationship and try to get Turkey to act as a middleman, a conduit, to be able to sell Russian gas onto the rest of Europe. Because as I've said before, Russia hasn't been planning for this eventuality. It hasn't been building large LNG facilities all across its network. So it doesn't have the ability to convert the lost sales into replacement sales, because the only way to sell that gas into Asia would be to liquefy it and put it onto ships. But it just doesn't have the capacity to do that. And because it's lost all of its trading partners, so ExxonMobil, Shell and BP have all left the country and said that they no longer want to invest, it's going to be difficult for them to be able to build these facilities quickly because they don't have access to capital or the expertise. So this is coming at a really bad time for Russia. Its revenues are currently shrinking, so it doesn't have tens of billions of dollars available to be able to build these new LNG facilities. So the only real option that President Putin has is to try to get people to buy the gas in a gaseous form through the pipelines. So this is why he's come up with this proposal that Turkey becomes the middleman, because it enables Russia to still earn some revenue from all of that gas. Otherwise, it's just either going to be left in the ground, or they will need to start torching it, start burning the gas. So whilst at face value this may look like a benevolent gesture from President Putin, it's actually a desperate attempt to claw back all of that lost revenue from this valuable resource. So if you've been following the channel for a while, you'll know that I've been covering the situation in Turkey for quite a significant time. And Turkey is facing some major problems, predominantly because it's a net importer of energy products. So it imports large amounts of gas, over half of it from Russia, to be used to create electricity and also to be used in industry. And it also imports large volumes of oil. And as a result of that, Turkey has been running a negative balance of trade. It imports more than it exports, and it's run out of currency. And over the course of the last 18 months or so, we've seen the Turkish lira devalue significantly. In 2021, it fell by 44%, and so far this year, it's fallen by another 20%. So there has been a material devaluation, and that's led to a high degree of dollarization in Turkey. So a lot of the people are more comfortable using euros or dollars rather than Turkish lira. So there's a real crisis going on right now, and it's very difficult to solve, because whilst energy prices are staying high as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Turkey is continuing to need to find more and more currency and need to do more deals. So Turkey is really looking for a way out of this crisis. And this idea of setting itself up as a gas hub is actually quite clever. In theory, this could work to both Europe's and Turkey's advantage. Europe has set up itself over the last 20 years to be dependent on gas. And replacing all of this pipeline gas with LNG, firstly, is expensive because you need to put all of the facilities in place. And secondly, it takes a long period of time. And then thirdly, for some countries that are landlocked, it's very difficult to actually be able to do it, because it's easier if you've got coastline and you can use a floating regasification facility. But if you're sitting in the middle of Europe and you don't have any coast, then you need to rely upon other countries doing that for you and then transmitting the gas directly to your country. So there are a lot of logistical problems relating to LNG, but more importantly, from an economic point of view, it's very expensive. The cost of LNG is likely to be more than double what it was for the original gas supplies. And this is coming at a time when we've got high rates of inflation. A lot of countries are teetering on the brink of recession. We're seeing interest rates rising all across Europe. So it's a really difficult time to have to spend a lot of money on new infrastructure. So in theory, if Turkey could set itself up as a hub, it could replace the Russian gas supplies with other gas supplies that Europe could potentially be happy to buy. Now, obviously, President Putin's proposal that Russia provides all of the gas to Turkey and then Turkey sells it on is completely unacceptable, because that essentially is still providing Russia with large amounts of revenue. And the whole point of the sanctions that Europe have put in place over the last 7 or 8 months is to deprive Russia of that revenue in order to get them to stop the war in Ukraine. So there is no way on earth that Europe is going to agree to buy large quantities of gas from Turkey that's coming directly out of Russia. But there is an alternative option here, because Turkey has supply lines set up with Iran and Azerbaijan, and potentially could also set up an arrangement with Qatar. Now, whilst Iran isn't facing the same level of sanctions that Russia is right now, there are significant sanctions against them, and so it's unlikely that Europe would be happy to replace Russian gas with Iranian gas, because there's similar connotations. But there is a theoretical possibility that Turkey could team up with Azerbaijan or Qatar to take in large quantities of gas and then transmit it on into Europe. The problem that Turkey has, though, is that it doesn't have any spare capacity whatsoever. So the existing pipelines are being fully utilised to provide Turkey with the gas it needs. So there is no way that it can sell any of that gas on into Europe, because it would leave itself short and would then need to buy more gas directly from somebody else. So in order to solve this problem, new pipelines would need to be constructed, and that is going to take time and money to be able to put into place. And realistically, Europe doesn't have the benefit of that time. It's impossible for Europe to be able to wait for 12 or 18 months at best for these new pipelines to be constructed. They need the gas now, because that gas is needed to create electricity to keep the economies moving forward. So whilst on paper this is a concept that could work over a period of time, over the next 12 to 18 months, it's more likely that Europe will have already pivoted and gone to either LNG or taken more gas directly from Norway, or just decided to move away from gas and build more renewable facilities, or even go back to using coal. So if you've been following the channel, you'll know that I've spoken a lot previously about secondary sanctions. And the secondary sanctions are going to be a key element that's used by the West over the next 6 months to try to get Russia to stop the war in Ukraine. And just to recap, secondary sanctions are basically sanctions that are applied against any country that continues dealing with Russia in areas that are restricted or off limits. Now, the purchase of gas currently is not sanctioned. A lot of countries in Europe are still buying gas directly from Russia. But over the course of the next 6 months or so, it's likely that Europe will move away from those purchases and those sanctions will be put in place. And once those sanctions are in place, the origin of any gas that's being sold into Europe will be looked into. And if that gas is coming directly from Russia, then any country who's trying to effect those deals would be at risk of facing secondary sanctions. So in this situation, if Turkey was to buy large quantities of gas from Russia and then try to sell that gas on into Europe as Turkish gas, that would very much put them in a position where they could be hit with secondary sanctions. And the last thing that Turkey wants is those secondary sanctions. I recently reported on what was happening with the MER payment system, which was the Russian system that's been developed to replace Visa and MasterCard, because both of those companies have sanctioned Russia. And the MER payment system had been accepted in Turkey and was available for Russian tourists when they came into the country. However, recently Turkey have decided that they no longer want to support that system because they they run the risk of secondary sanctions by doing so? And this really shows that Turkish businesses are concerned about losing their business with the West, and they don't want to fall foul of these secondary sanctions. So the proposal that President Putin's putting forward of supplying Russian gas to Turkey for onward sale into Europe really isn't going to work, because the secondary sanctions will look at where that gas originated from, and it will cause problems for Turkey if it tries to sell it as Turkish gas. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think the proposal that's been put forward by President Putin is an interesting idea. And if you were looking at this just from a problem-solving perspective, it looks like quite a good concept. You take gas from Russia, you pass it through Turkey, it becomes Turkish gas, and then you can sell it on to Europe. Job done. But obviously that's not going to work, because Europe is fully aware that Turkey currently doesn't have sufficient gas supplies to be able to sell onto Europe. So it would need to import that gas before selling it on, and the only place that it was going to get it from, if President Putin is involved, is Russia. And the secondary sanctions have been set up to make sure that nobody buys second-hand Russian gas wherever it's coming from. So realistically, this is not an idea that's going to get off the ground. But what it does show us is that Russia are suffering right now. President Putin has come out and made this statement. He's actually had a meeting with President Erdogan of Turkey where he floated this idea. And that shows that Russia are very concerned about the huge loss of revenue that they're facing as a result of Europe turning its back on Russian gas. And as I've said many times before, Russia has not been planning ahead for this. They haven't been building those LNG facilities. So that gas in the ground is entirely useless to them at the moment. If they can't convert it into a liquefied form, they're going to have to leave it under the ground because nobody else is wanting to buy it. And that's a real problem for Russia. And that's why President Putin is now desperately scrambling around and trying to come up with an idea that enables him to monetize this gas. Because as it stands, they're losing this source of revenue. And what's likely over the course of the next 6 to 12 months is that Europe are going to change their infrastructure entirely. So we'll see liquefied natural gas facilities being set up, and then long term, Europe will be buying LNG. It won't be looking to buy gaseous gas. So even in the very unlikely circumstances that Europe and Russia were to make good, if they became best friends again and said, okay, we'll carry on our trading relationship, it would be too late by that stage, because Germany and Italy and the other big nations of Europe will have changed the way their infrastructure operates, and so gaseous gas won't be attractive to them anymore. And of course, over the longer term, over the next 10 to 20 years, it's likely that all of the European countries will be moving more towards renewable energy anyway. So everybody wants to get away from fossil fuels and get to the point where you're not having to import large amounts of energy and be beholden to people who own all of those reserves. So once again, what we're seeing here is that the actions of Russia don't really stack up with what their official releases are saying. So they're saying that everything is going fine, it's all in order, revenues have dropped slightly, we're looking at maybe a 4% drop in GDP in 2022, a similar figure for 2023, and then we will bounce back. So it's all very calm in terms of the official statements. But when you hear President Putin asking another president to set up themselves as a gas hub in order to sell his gas, that tells me that Russia are not calm and things are not going well, and they are not looking at a 4% drop in GDP in 2022. It's likely to be significantly more because they are losing massive chunks of revenue. If they're going to lose $20 or $30 billion from the non-sale of gas, they're not going to be able to make that up anywhere else because their oil sales are also falling. A lot of their other export products have been sanctioned. So there's no real pulley that they can offset this with. They're just losing revenue and there's nothing to benefit from. So overall, the Russian economy is looking in a precarious position. And oil and gas are very high fixed cost businesses. So when you set up those facilities, there are a lot of expenses and a lot of costs on an ongoing basis. So when you have a drop in revenue, it will impact you because those fixed costs remain as is. So you're always paying those costs, but your profit comes down significantly if you have a big fall in revenues. So Russia is really struggling right now. And whilst we won't get the detail on how bad it is because they're not releasing the figures anymore, What we're seeing right now really shows us that President Putin is starting to sweat over the potential downside of everything that's going on in Ukraine. So hopefully that's given you a bit more perspective on the situation. I'll keep you posted on any further news and developments on this or any related stories. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already.